Welcome to Preemptive Strike, the show where we look at the first hour of a JRPG to gauge the entertainment value of its opening act and gather statistical data to analyze the trends across different games. Join us as we journey through the rich history of JRPGs to see how their gameplay evolves and innovates from one game to the next. For each game, we'll examine how the first hour sets the tone for the rest of the journey, explore the ways in which the story and gameplay unfold to draw the player into the world and keep them coming back, as well as explain general tips, tricks, and trivia for a first-time player. Today, we'll discuss all of this and more on Preemptive Strike. Welcome to episode 6 of Preemptive Strike, the show where we talk about all the things you need to know before starting up your retro RPG adventure. This week, we will be talking about Dragon Warrior 4 for the NES. So Tyler, tell me about a general overview of the game.
Alright, so Dragon Quest IV, Chapters of the Chosen, as is known in the West. It released on the Famicom February 11, 1990. In the West, we wouldn't get it on the NES until October 1992. And interestingly, DQ3 had released in March earlier the same year. So that ends up being about a 963-day gap between the Famicom and NES releases. And to put the 1992 release date in perspective, the Super Nintendo came out August 23rd, 1991. So very late into the NES's lifespan, people were moving on to the Super Nintendo by then.
And it's also a fairly niche series of games at that time.
Right, for
So,
the West at least.
So it doesn't surprise me that it didn't sell well, but we'll get into that.
Yeah, okay, so like all the previous Dragon Quest or Dragon Warrior games, it was developed by Chunsoft and published by Enix. And the same staff members were still on staff at the time, so Koichi Nakamura being the director, Yuji Horii being the designer and writer, Akira Toriyama with his iconic art like usual, and Koichi Sugiyama being the composer for the music. Now, as Chad alluded to, get the looted counter started again. The loose cartridge for an NES copy today is $129 about. It's really expensive because it did not sell well in the West. And if you want complete in box, you're looking at about almost $350. One day I hope to have it in my collection. It's a really nice looking box and everything, and the manual's really nice, but not anytime soon. Alright, sales-wise, Japan has some crazy sales for this game. In just 1 hour, they sold 1.3 million cartridges. Today, even selling a million games is like impressive for AA games, stuff like that. But like doing that in just an hour for an NES game or a Famicom game, like just insane.
I think that speaks towards how well Dragon Quest III did throughout its lifespan, right? Like before Dragon Quest IV came out, and that generated a lot of popularity, which rolled into Dragon Quest IV and everybody wanting to buy it.
For sure, like it just really resonated with Japanese fans like very quickly. Like even Final Fantasy or like any other series like struggled to become that popular with Japan. 1.3 million sales in Japan, but the US 80,000 only. That's like so sad. Like, a drop in the bucket compared to the rest of the worldwide sales overall, like 99% of them being in Japan. They could have just not released it in the US and they probably would have made more profit that way, just localizing it and everything. It's sad to say, but it is how history unfolded.
Yeah, it seems like there weren't too many remakes or ports of Dragon Quest IV throughout the years. It was only ever ported to the PlayStation, the Nintendo DS, and phones, but PlayStation version is Japan only.
The interesting thing about the PlayStation one is when Dragon Warrior 7 released in the United States, they actually have an advertisement with the manual showing the lookout for Dragon Quest 4, or Dragon Warrior 4 as they call it, like a remake to be coming out for the PlayStation, but we never got it.
Okay.
And interestingly, the iOS and Android version is the definitive way to play the game today, or at least in English. Whenever they localized the DS version, they ran out of time and I think funding as well, so they just did not translate everything. They just removed the party chat features, it's called, where you could talk to your party members any point in the game. Pretty much any time you talk to an NPC or like go to a different area, like there's always new dialogue, so like there's more dialogue in party chat than there is like everywhere else in the game.
A shame that they couldn't finish the Nintendo DS translation. And that's weird because DQ5 and DQ6 also came out on the DS. I'd like to dig into the history of that. But for the NES version of Dragon Warrior 4, if you're looking to play the game yourself, the main story takes around 27 hours, according to howlongtobeat.com, and it can go all the way up to 43 hours for the completionist. That's pretty impressive for an NES game. As far as how the game fared after it released, so we already know how the sales went, but what kind of awards were it given for its creativity and whatnot. Famitsu said that it was 1990s best hits. And interestingly, Nintendo Power in North America awarded Dragon Warrior 4 second place in its best overall game category in 1993. That's pretty weird. And also in 1997, Electronic Gaming Monthly, again in the United States, ranked Dragon Warrior 4 as the 58th best console video game of all time, calling it easily the best RPG ever released for the NES in the US or Japan. That's just crazy that it was actually getting recognition back in the 90s for how
Yeah,
poorly it sold.
it really did age very well. I feel like a lot of future games end up taking a lot of inspiration from Dragon Quest IV, as we'll get into that a little bit later.
Yeah, right. A lot of things did end up taking from Dragon Quest IV, like how there was the spin-off game from Toniko, was his name? Tornico?
Co.
Yeah, and there were some features within the game that were implemented in later games. We can talk about that during the general discussion later. Like you said, Tyler, though, the game was pretty innovative for the time. Kind of like we saw with Final Fantasy II, in all honesty, at least in terms of innovation to the genre and kind of just coming before its time. Because in Dragon Warrior 4, the big thing is the AI battle system, which we didn't really get to see in the first hour. But for the development of the game, Nakamura and Hori really wanted to emphasize the AI battles. That was something that they were really hoping to implement in the game as soon as they started development. And that was because they wanted to challenge themselves and they wanted to bring something new to the genre that hadn't really been used before. And as future games show, AI for non-player characters, or even just like temporary AI for some characters, is heavily used in many future games.
Yeah, I'd say the other takeaway, or what really stands out or makes Dragon Quest IV unique for the time, being the focus on the story when it comes to the actual characters. Like, they split up the
Mhm.
story into 5 chapters so that each party member gets a chance to shine, like tell their story. Previous games, so like the closest we probably got to this was like Final Fantasy II, somewhat, but it still wasn't much like when it came to what the characters did, other than like your fourth party member really having any actual story.
Yeah, it's the point where we start to see like Japanese role-playing games almost being like a book, but as a game.
Absolutely.
Especially because the different segments of the game are fittingly called chapters, kind of tying it in more to the book aspect of it. But if you bought the game at the time it was released, you would get a manual with it, and that manual does have a pretty good story in it, Tyler. So can you tell me
Yeah.
anything about the manual?
So one of the first things the manual goes over is the 5 chapters explains to you. It gives you an overview of each chapter you're going to look forward to as you play. So like chapter 1, which both Chad and I played through, we didn't make it to any of the future chapters. But chapter 1, you follow Ragnar. He's a soldier. We'll get a little bit more into his story later. Chapter 2, you follow Princess Alina and her advisors, her friend. Chapter 3, which I'm honestly disappointed we couldn't show off in this episode because it's the most unique, like almost any RPG I've ever played. You play as, well, he's known as Toloon in the NES version, but Torrenko, as he's known in later releases. You play as a merchant. It's less about RPG and battles, and it's more about making money and selling items at like a shop. And then chapter 4, you have the Sisters of Monbaraba. In later releases, I forget the names called for their town, but it's French based, and it's Mina and Maya. They go through their story, and then finally chapter 5 is the chosen ones, at least in the NES version, and that's when all of your party members meet up and you actually finally see your hero that you named at the beginning of the game, and you start the journey.
Yeah, so two things. One, I think we see something similar to this with Final Fantasy VI. Whenever you get to that one point, you have to pick the three splitting paths, and you have like three different characters to play as. Something similar where you have like different chapters and then they meet up again.
Yes.
But two, this is really similar to what we would later see in the game Live Alive, or Live Alive, as it's technically supposed to be pronounced.
Yeah, I believe the developers even said that like they took Dragon Quest IV as their inspiration for Live Alive or Live Alive.
Yeah, yeah. So that's kind of cool. Now, I'm also disappointed in the manual for just outright spoiling that there are five chapters in the game.
I don't know if it's that big of a deal or less of a spoiler because it doesn't really. It just gives you like the intro of what's going to happen, not like what actually happens.
Yeah, it's more about the journey than the destination.
Absolutely. So another thing the manual does is like essentially a guide for what to do in the chapters. So for instance, for chapter 1, it shows you going to Berland, which is the starting town. Then you go to the cave to the west, which is just known as Cave to Ismith. You go to Ismith, then you go to the bottom of the old well, and then the lock tower. But it also gives you hints or suggestions of what level you should be for each area, as well as what items to get or characters to recruit while you're at those certain locations.
Yeah, which is something we didn't see in the previous games. There's technically optional characters to recruit.
Yeah, I want to go into more detail with that later when we go to the gameplay.
Yeah, but you'd be pretty hard pressed to not recruit Healy. Um,
Absolutely. So, as I've mentioned or alluded to before, my personal history with Dragon Quest IV is I've only played the iOS version recently, about 2 years ago. It's an amazing game, and I every time I like played it for a bit, I just kept thinking to myself, "Man, is this really an NES game? Like, just how well it aged." Yes, the DS version just makes it more definitive, especially the additional story elements that get added just through party chat alone, giving a lot more context as well as more characterization for each character and party member. But Chad, what's your history with Dragon Quest IV?
Absolutely nothing. Like at least Dragon Quest 1, 2, and 3, I knew a little bit about them. I knew a little bit about the story. I've watched gameplay of them before, and I may or may not have played a little bit whenever I was dabbling around with emulators. But Dragon Quest 4, this is the first one that I knew nothing about. Like absolutely nothing. So that was kind of a good motivating force for me to want to try out the first hour to see, how much do I like it.
Yeah, for sure. So there's really not much for us to go over when it comes to gameplay mechanics or new game mechanics. If you played Dragon Quest 2 or 3, they function very similarly, or at least like when it's in battles. The main difference being the AI of your party members. I got a little bit of this with Hilly in my party, but you only control like your first party member. You don't control the other ones. They have like AI that they use to make their or determine their actions. So
Yeah.
Hilly is the optional party member of chapter 1. He's a hill slime, and he could do like light attacks that do like maybe 2 damage, but more than likely he's going to just either defend or heal you. I mean, it's in his name. But like we didn't really get to see too much of this feature just because we're in chapter 1. But as you get later, or at least when you get to chapter 5, and you have the full party, you get to understand how the AI works for each party member more and more as you use them. So with that, I think it's time we could start discussing our first hour of gameplay.
Yeah, I agree. So, as you mentioned, we start off with the knight Ragnar. I really liked that name. I thought it sounds similar to Ragnarok,
Oh yeah, I never thought of that.
but I don't think he's going to bring about the end of the world. But yeah, we start playing as Ragnar, and you start in the town of Berland at the castle, and you're told that there are a bunch of missing children in the town over Ismit, and you are given the quest to find where those missing children have gone. So you prepare. You can go to the shops and buy some things, although Ragnar already comes equipped with, I believe it's a copper sword
It
and
is.
leather armor. You're pretty much prepared for the battles that are going to be outside, and unlike Dragon Quest II, they actually balanced the game, realizing that you would only have one party member at this time. So the battles aren't too tough, and traveling to Ismit is super easy. They really just streamlined the process.
Yeah, it's very short distance away, but also it's your only option. So there's not a lot of exploration, at least for these early chapters. Like you're kind of locked to like a certain continent. But
Right.
at the same time, too, that gets you more time in each continent to get more connected to like the individual towns.
And that's what you were saying earlier, where there's a huge focus on story rather than gameplay. So, did you have any trouble finding Ismit?
No, well,
Yeah.
especially since like I played the game so recently, like or it is fresh in my memory. I think it's a memorable game overall. I knew exactly what I needed to immediately do. The only thing I messed up on is I didn't realize I had to actually talk to Alex's wife at town first to
Mm,
start the sequence. Like I thought I could just go talk to the Alex first and then go back get his wife. So I lost a little bit of time having to go back a second time.
interesting. Okay. I must have accidentally talked to his wife whenever I was just going around talking to all the NPCs, because I just wanted to talk to all the NPCs in Berlin at the beginning, like before I even left Berlin. So then, whenever I had gone over, I talked with Alex, and then I waited until nighttime and went back to Ismit. So that's another thing that they brought back from DQ3, the day-night cycle, which is still pretty innovative for an NES game. And there's different people you can talk to at night, and or they'll say different things. And then there was one person, I believe he was in the inn, that said Alex's wife is in Berlin. You should go talk with her.
Mm-hmm.
So then I went back to Ismit, talked to his wife, and got through that. But it's kind of annoying that right at the beginning of the game, the first air quotes quest that you get is a fetch quest. It's to go back and forth. You go from Berlin to Ismit, back to Berlin, and then you go back to Ismit.
But
So
see, one thing I liked, like with the backtracking at least, is just seeing the other like soldiers that Ragnar works with, and you could just talk to them, like see how
mm,
they're going with their journey.
I agree. I agree. But we didn't even mention why do we need to talk with Alex? So apparently Alex knows something about why these kids have gone missing. He's clearly not abducting the children.
Well, yeah, he's in jail,
Yeah, so
but for being drunk.
he's in jail for being drunk, but he knows something, but he needs to be released from jail before he reveals to us anything. To which, after you free him from jail by going back and forth between Berlin and Ismit, he tells you to go to the sign in front of the forest and then walk 4 steps south and 4 steps east.
Interestingly,
Yeah.
the tile that you gotta walk on will not activate until you do that sequence. Because I did try to see if I could just skip
Okay.
that right away.
Yeah, I was curious about that. I was going to ask you about that. But what I don't like is that it says 4 south and 4 east, but it's implying that you're on top of the signpost whenever it says 4 south and 4 east. So if you are one tile in front of the signpost, it's really 3 south and 4 east.
I mean, that's really not that big of a deal though, because
It's
like you
it's
just
not.
walk another tile.
Yeah, it's not that big of a deal, but it made me lost for about 10 seconds. Yeah, so there's a totally hidden tile in the forest. There's no way of telling that it's there other than the instructions that Alex gives you. To which, after you go onto that tile, come across this old well, and a voice starts guiding you through the well. Who is that voice? Do you know?
I don't think it's ever stated, like
Hmm,
in any release. It's
interesting.
not Healy, because the voice will still go on even after you have Healy.
Hmm,
But the one thing that gets me out of the voice is like it tells you go this way, but there's no way for you to actually figure out like when you get to an intersection which way to go
yeah, right.
until you actually pick a direction and it'll tell you not that way.
I thought that was kind of more comedic almost, but yeah, it's like almost implying that there was like a sound-based system. How do they change that in the remakes?
It's the same.
Okay,
It's not like they tell you, oh, just go south or go west or anything like that. It's just still the same thing.
okay. But that voice, while it does guide you to the treasure of the cave, which is the flying shoes, it technically misguides you because it will guide you away from finding Healy.
Yeah, so one thing I'd like to mention about Hilly, this is the first time in the Dragon Quest series where you get to actually use a monster on your team. Hilly isn't a permanent party member, so like he leaves your party, or I don't know if Hilly what pronouns Hilly uses actually. I forget. But like Haley does make an appearance in Dragon Quest Monsters 3: The Dark Prince, because that game is actually just the story of Dragon Quest 4, but in Pizarro's perspective.
So could you tell me what is the difference between Healy and just any other heal slime?
Haley's just Haley. He could talk.
Okay.
That's about it. A lot of monsters actually like in some of the other Dragon Quest games, I believe we've seen like slimes that like can speak to you. In Dragon
Hmm.
Quest 3, actually, yeah, I think there are a few slimes that like you could interact and talk. So it's not like monsters aren't sentient or anything like that. It just the narrative they kind of push like throughout the Zenithian trilogy a lot of times is that like not all monsters are bad.
Hmm. Yeah.
Or that's a lot, or like that's more apparent in Dragon Quest V whenever like the main gameplay mechanic is monster recruitment too.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, brief side tangent. You brought up the Zenithian trilogy. So yeah, the first three games are what people call the Erdrick trilogy because that follows the story of Erdrick, the legendary hero. But starting on the fourth game, they kind of start a new chapter, pun intended, I guess. They start a new chapter of the like overarching story of Dragon Quest, I guess.
Yeah, so monsters and like items and stuff are still the same that are in Dragon Quest, but the story wise, it's not connected to 1, 2, or 3.
Right.
So in the cave, if you follow the voice, you'll eventually get led to the flying shoes item that's in a chest.
Yep.
But if you keep exploring, like Chad said, you will find Haley. There's also a few other chests in there. One of the chests was really worth it, for me at least. It was 600 gold coins,
Hmm.
which is just a ton early game.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like
You
I
could
was able
definitely.
to go back to town and buy the most expensive piece of equipment.
Yeah, I could have definitely used that.
But one thing that like really stood out to me, like once I had the flying shoes, is that the inventory space is too limited in this game.
Hmm.
So you have to have the flying shoes as like one of your slots in your bag or inventory space, and then you have your equipment. You have two pieces of equipment at least when you start. So that's already three of your slots taken up. And then like you only have space I think for four or five other items. And since Ragnar can only do physical attacks, like you need to have a bunch of healing items.
Yeah.
So it's kind of tough right away. And Healy, if you did get him, you can't use inventory space with him at all. If
Yeah.
you try to buy an item, even like the shopkeeper gets racist with you, so I can't sell to a monster.
Well, he doesn't have any pockets.
I guess, but I don't know. He has several arms or hands or like tentacles to hold stuff with.
Yeah. Yeah, so you are right. Ragnar is strapped for inventory space. I made sure, because I neglected to do this in the previous Dragon Quest games, I made sure to buy a lot of herbs. Because they are pretty
Yes.
cheap. You you only need to fight one battle and you already have enough gold. It's only 8 gold to get an herb. And it's also like 6 to sleep in the inn. So they make healing ridiculously cheap. Your limiting factor is inventory space, which is why when you use the flying shoes and then you go to the lock tower, it becomes really difficult, especially if you don't have Healy like me, because
Yeah, so
there's a big difficulty spike.
yeah, when you first land into the tower, you see a little cutscene of some or monsters taking some children down to the basement. You go down one flight of stairs and you see one of your other soldiers that you're from the same castle as Ragnar made it to that
Hmm.
tower too, and he's like, "Man, I should have took Healy with me. He was in the well." So that's your
Hmm.
hint if you didn't get Healy in the well to go to the well and get Healy. Or the amount of time that having Healy in your party you'll save that way is definitely worth backtracking to the well. Especially the limited inventory space, like we're already saying, like it'd be very difficult, or you'd have to overlevel essentially to beat the boss of the area or of the tower.
So yeah, during my first hour, I really I got my ass handed to me in the tower, died. I also I should go back a little bit. In the well, I I ended up exploring a little bit, but then I
Mm-hmm.
fought some enemies that were a little bit too high of a level for me at that time, and I died in the well. Then
I had a
I
few close calls in the well, but I made it unscathed.
But then, whenever I got out of the well and healed up and everything, I naively used the flying slippers to go straight to the tower because I thought, oh, how hard could this tower be? It's the first dungeon, or like the first proper dungeon. Yeah, then I died a second time. And whenever you die, you lose half your gold. So I spent a lot of time just grinding to get more gold.
Yeah, the tower is definitely a huge difficulty spike. I mean, I would say that even like the well is a huge difficulty spike. But the
Yeah,
one enemy that like really stood out to me in the tower being the giant bantams, which they kind of look like
mm,
foghorn and leghorn if they could fly.
I didn't encounter any
But
of those.
they were really annoying because their regular attack had a chance of putting you to sleep. So at least when I had heal, like one of my characters was usually awake dealing with them, but couldn't really do much damage unless Ragnar was awake. And since Ragnar's slow, he usually got put to sleep before he even got a chance to attack one of the bantams.
Now, speaking of enemy design, I just want to say that I feel like starting with DQ4, the enemy designs became more alien to me. Like, I'm not saying they look like aliens from outer space. What I'm trying to say is that they're not as iconic. The enemies from Dragon Quest 1, 2, and 3, at least in the beginning areas of Dragon Quest 1, 2, and 3, were so iconic and just ingrained in RPG culture in general. But some of the enemies that you fought in the beginning here, like there was the giant earthworms that you fought in the cave to Ismet,
Uh-huh.
or there's those like flying mice that you could fight with like the
Yeah.
huge ears, or the tree stumps that you could fight. Some of them just felt like Earthbound enemies, and honestly, Earthbound probably took inspiration from these enemies.
I was gonna say, I'd say, yeah, yeah, you're definitely right, at least when it comes to the iconicness. Like a
Hmm.
lot of these enemies like aren't recurring as often as others in future games.
Yeah.
The one that probably is the most iconic from like that you mentioned would be like or they're called stump chumps in later games, so like
Mm.
the tree stumps. They're in a lot of games. But like most of the monsters that you mentioned, like you only see really in like the Dragon Quest monsters or like Monster Jokers games.
Yeah, so it's just interesting that they started out the game with those. Maybe they were trying to go for something like because they ended the Erdrick trilogy, they were trying to open up with something new,
Hmm.
kind of like what Pokemon tries to do with whenever they have a new generation. They try to keep the early areas with more new Pokemon.
Another thing with enemies that stood out to me is they really wanted to make you feel the progression in your strength. Like whenever you were like level one, it takes barely 2 hits to kill an enemy. So whenever you get like just 1 or 2 level ups, then you start one-shotting them immediately. Like
Hmm.
that just feels like a lot of progression immediately.
Yeah, until you get to the tower.
Yeah. Yeah, so like part of me regrets buying the like full armor suit that I bought instead. I should have just bought like one of the stronger weapons to kill enemies
Mm.
faster.
Yeah,
But at the same time too, then I might be dying more often.
sometimes the best defense is a good offense.
But like if I had to estimate, I probably had about 15 more minutes of the tower before I got to the boss and then beat chapter one. When you get later into the tower, there's actually a room that has like a healing pad thing, so you don't have to leave the tower to
Oh,
heal.
okay. So you could grind in the tower as well
You
if you need
can.
to. That's
Yeah,
cool.
so the boss that you would be fighting are so like all we know of the story so far is that like children are getting abducted. We don't know why. You get to the boss, you get a little bit more story, and like it starts foreshadowing like events that are going to be happening later. Because each
Hmm.
chapter takes place after the other ones, like chronologically. So you fight. I don't know what he's going to be called in the NES version, but you fight Pizarro's pawn and a Winky enemy. But basically, they were kidnapping children looking for the descendant of a Zenithian.
What exactly does a descendant of a Zenithian look like?
Good question. One thing that we didn't mention is like when you start the game, you name your hero, but you don't actually see that hero, so we have no clue. So slight spoilers for the story, but the hero is a descendant of a Zenithian because the hero is actually half human, half Zenithian, which Zenithians at least are portrayed as essentially like angels. So like other release or future releases like the DS and PlayStation versions, whenever you first name your hero, like rather than starting at chapter one, you actually get like a prelude. You get introduced to both the hero and you get to see Pizarro for the first time. And yeah, it's pretty interesting too, because like this is the first time that like in older RPGs where you actually see like the final boss get characterized and built up throughout the story.
Yeah,
I mean, I guess Final Fantasy 2, you kept hearing about the Emperor, but like
well,
actually seeing some of his actions a lot of times.
yeah, I mean, you fight the Emperor about halfway through the game. at least the Emperor on Earth. But you are right. I think Dragon Quest IV does take this a step further.
Yeah, Pizarro or is very popular, at least for the Dragon Quest community. Like even to this day, like he's probably like hailed as like one of the best villains in the series, if not the best.
Is he the Kefka of Dragon Quest?
He's
Or
more of the like Sephiroth.
Sephiroth? Okay.
Or interestingly, like both their appearances are compared to quite often as well with Japanese fans.
Tyler, I think we're just about at the end talking about our gameplay, but I'm kind of curious, what did we miss out on? What could we have looked forward to in future parts of the game, since you know so much about the game?
Yeah, my very limited expertise of playing the game once. Some of the things we missed out on would be the 4 other chapters. So I already went over when I talked about the manual, like each of them. Chapter 2 being Princess Alina's story. She's just a Russian tomboy. She's another very popular character. Like, a lot of the characters in Dragon Quest IV are just very popular for just the franchise as a whole.
I mean, it makes sense that Princess Alina got a manga released about her. I found that out during research for this.
And then there's the iconic Kirio party member, which is also with Alina. He's
Hmm.
notable because his AI constantly spams instant death spells that just don't hit stuff. And then chapter 3, like I said, Torrenko's chapter is very unique for RPGs. Highly would recommend people checking out Dragon Quest IV just for that alone.
So we did see a merchant class in Dragon Quest III, although that was more just to aid you in battle, giving you extra gold and giving you descriptions for items. How does Torinko's chapter? Is there any battling at all in Torinko's chapter?
There is battling, and like they want you to grind a bunch of gold. And like interestingly, you could like hire allies. Like you could pay gold to hire allies because like Torrenko's not that strong. And like there's a optional dungeon technically that like gets you stronger items to sell right away, and then the king gives you like a task of getting I think 60,000 gold, at least in the DS version. Like that sounds like an insane amount for early game, but like if you use all the mechanics they give you when it comes to generating cash, it's not too bad. See, another thing we missed on, like modes of travel. So you have a boat still, like other Dragon Quest or just RPGs in general, but the unique mode of travel that Dragon Quest IV has is a hot air balloon. And like one of the parts of the game, you actually have to get gas for it so
Hmm.
that you can actually unlock it and fly it.
Is that in one of the earlier chapters?
No, this would be in
Hmm.
chapter 5.
Okay. I think you skipped over chapter 4 because I interrupted you and asked you about chapter 3.
Oh, yeah, I did skip over 4 and 5 technically, but chapter 4 is like, at least in the DS and later versions of it, like it's a French like based area. It's like kind of based on like French Revolution to a certain degree. And it follows Mina and Maya's story of revenge, to avenge their father.
Are there any beheadings?
No, not that I'm aware of. You do fight Balzac though.
A very nice name.
Yeah. And then chapter 5 is when everyone gets together. So like parts of the main thing that actually connects everyone together is actually Tornco, because part of what he funds in his chapter, or towards the end of the chapter, is building a tunnel that goes through a mountain, and that connects a lot of like the continents together. Another thing
Interesting.
we missed out on is the tactics menu, where you could select different options for your party members and like how their AI functions. So you could say, I mean, we didn't get this far to see what options the NES version offers, but like for later releases, you'll have options like don't use MP, so like your mages won't just waste all their MP on spells right away in like longer dungeons, or you have like go all out where they just use their strongest attacks all the time. And then another thing we missed out on is the wagon. So you have more than 4 party members, but you can only fight with 4 party members at once. So the wagon gives you the option to switch out your party members, and for the time, RPGs didn't have this issue because they would just give you the number of party members that were allowed to be in your party at once. So this was Dragon Quest's solution for the problem. In some dungeons and like in the overworld, you could like switch out your party members during battle. So it's really nice if like someone died. But some areas, like part of the difficulty becomes that you're limited to just the 4 party members you bring in at the beginning of the dungeon. You can't just switch them out. And another thing we missed out on is a lot of music. So the overworld and battle music is actually different depending on what chapter you're in or who's your first party member. I think for the NES version at least, it's based on your chapter, but like the DS release, just whoever you have leading the party will change the music.
Hmm. That is quite innovative.
Yeah, so like again, like still very impressive for an NES game, just the amount of content and just innovations to the industry. All right, so that's all that we missed out on, but now let's go on to some of our gameplay stats to see how it stacks up to other games at the time.
Yeah,
So, Chad, how many towns did you visit in your first hour?
only two, Berlin and Izmit, as we discussed.
Same here. And then dungeons as well. I mean, I would consider the well and the tower to be both dungeons.
Yeah, yeah. The well, you don't really encounter enemies if you follow the voice, but the tower is definitely a dungeon, and you can encounter enemies in the well. So yeah, I agree. Those are both dungeons, and those are the only two dungeons I entered.
What was your encounter rate?
Yeah, my encounter rate was 92 in the first hour, which comes out to about 1.53 per minute. That was because I did a lot of grinding early on to get the gold necessary to buy new equipment because I didn't have Healy in my party and I thought that I needed new equipment to tackle the tower. What about you? How many enemies did you encounter?
Mine was 85, which turns out to be 1.42 per minute, and like that checks out. 'Cause as I was playing, like I just kept thinking like how high the encounter rate was.
Mm-hmm.
For me, or for the games that we've covered so far, this is the second highest, only being beaten by Dragon Warrior 1.
Wow. Yeah, for me, this one was the highest so far. It does show you, though, that the battles are pretty snappy. Like, you can get in and out of a battle in less than 15 seconds sometimes.
Yeah. A lot of times, though, like I found myself running more than any of the other games from battles.
Oh man, you're running from battles. You're notorious for not running.
I know, it's just like. So, like, a lot of. Okay, in the well, for instance, there was like a hill slime enemy I was fighting, and
Mm,
like, it takes two shots to kill, at least for the point I was at.
yeah.
And it just kept healing itself every turn. So like I think I fought it for like 2 minutes straight. So then every time I was just came into a battle with like hill slimes, I just started running from them because like it just wasn't worth it for like the 6 experience they gave or whatever it was.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So, from all of that running away, you were a pretty cautious fighter. Did you die at all?
No, I had a few close calls. Like at one point I got down to 1 HP even, but I lived.
Yeah, I went through 4 deaths total. That's a lot for me.
How
How,
long did it take you to get to your first encounter?
yeah, so this game, like most of the previous Dragon Quest games, picks up pretty quickly. It only took me 3 minutes and 48 seconds.
For me, it only took me almost 2 minutes flat, 2:03.
Yeah, I wanted to stick around Berlin and talk to some of the townsfolk.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but from that early encounter, Tyler, at what time did you level up for the first time?
4 minutes and 26 seconds, so it took a few battles.
Yeah, surprisingly, even though my first encounter was over a minute beyond yours, my first level up was 5 minutes and 23 seconds.
How many times did you end up going to the inn?
I ended up visiting the inn only a total of 3 times. I was surprised how much abuse Ragnar could take from the at least the early enemies before the tower.
Yeah, he's pretty sturdy, and then they do give you quite a few like medical herbs, like at least in that cave going
Mm-hmm.
to Ismit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I survived on medical herbs. And how
And
about
what
you? How many times did you visit the inn?
I visited a total of 7.
Okay, so more than me. Would you say that that made the game like? Would you say that this game's any more difficult than the previous Dragon Quest or Final Fantasy games that we've played?
I don't think it's more difficult. Like I didn't think it's difficult. Like at least from what I played. Like sure, I felt the difficulty spikes, but I don't know.
It's difficult, but there's clearly a way around it.
Yeah, like if you're experienced with the Dragon Quest gameplay, like you should know how to handle yourself more.
Yeah, it's not unfairly difficult,
Mm-hmm. And
but
especially because I knew about getting Healy.
yeah, yeah. Okay, rub it in. At the end of that first hour, though, what level did you finish at?
Level 8, and then Healy's level just shows a question mark since he's not a permanent party member.
Mm-mm. See, I was only level 7, but that's probably because I hung around the tower a little bit less. Those enemies in the tower give you significantly more experience.
For sure.
Yeah. So now that all is said and done about our gameplay stats, Tyler, would you pay $1 to pay the first hour of this game?
I would. I had a great time overall. I would like to see more of the NES version, see how they handled things like Tornko's chapter,
Mm,
as well as I want to see or experience the final boss for myself, because it has so many animations, or so many forms, and the NES has some pretty good animations for his transformations.
mm, mm. Okay, basing this purely on my knowledge of the first hour of the game and not any outside knowledge of what happens later in the game, I would say no, I would not pay $1 for this because you're stuck with only Ragnar at the beginning, who has no access to any kind of magic at all. So no attack magic, no healing magic. You literally just spam attack through all of the battles early on, and you get hit with this huge wall of difficulty whenever you go to the lock tower, which as a first time player, if I knew nothing about the game, about what could happen in the future, it just is a huge demotivator to play the game, to hit that huge blockade. But I did feel a little bit of a drive to keep playing because I wanted to find out why the children were kidnapped. So they gave you a little bit of an inkling to move on with the story. Although I do want to say one other complaint. There's no hint that this is going to be part of a larger story. They make it seem like it's just going to be a one-time quest. Like you finish this quest, you're done with your duty as a knight.
I disagree. It's chapter one. Like, it's gonna say something, or at least lead to something.
Yeah, but it didn't give any hint of that within the first hour, unless I missed something. I don't think there was any hint of a grander story within the first hour.
Yeah, what I was getting at was that, like, once you get to the boss, like, that's when
Yep,
they start talking about Pizarro.
that's
So,
not what
like, yeah,
about
it wasn't within an hour.
that's not within the hour. Sorry, I'm not trying to be a jerk about this, but to make a long story short, I don't think it was worth an hour based solely on what I played. If I could theoretically put another $1 into that magic machine that only lets you play an hour at a time, then maybe after playing 2 hours, I would change my tune. But I still, it's a hard no for me. That just about wraps everything up, wouldn't you say, Tyler?
I'd say so.
All right, so thanks for listening, guys. Glad you stuck around for the whole time that we talked about this game, and look forward to discussing a new game next time.
Yeah, we hope we gave a good overview of the first hour of what you could expect with Dragon Quest IV, and we hope, if anything, we inspired you to check out the game. So what are we going to be playing next time?
Good question. We're going to be playing Final Fantasy III for the NES. So pick up your own copy if you can and play along. See you then.
Thank you for watching today and sticking to the end. We hope we gave an accurate representation of the first hour of gameplay, and more importantly, we hope we inspired you to check out the game and give it a chance. If you liked the video, please like, comment, and subscribe for more JRPG content from us. We have a lot of projects in production, so keep an eye out. Let us know what games and series you'd like us to cover in the future. Follow us on Twitter at encounter_rate. If you want to listen to our content in a podcast format, check us out in the places listed on screen. Links will be in description. We plan to upload to additional podcast sites in the future, and if you have any preferred podcast sites you wish we were on, let us know in the comments. Thank you again for watching. Until next time, have a great day.